Researcher notes. Sometimes, life presents amazing moments that stay in the memory for a long time. Here is one such story related to an internal resource. My husband worked as a driver in the 80s and drove a Volga car. One day we went to the forest, but unfortunately the car got stuck. It was impossible to get out of the situation on our own, especially as it was beginning to get dark. And in addition, we could hear the terrible howling of jackal. My husband was going to go look for help, so that someone could help tow the car. However, the thought of being alone in the car in the middle of the night filled me with fear. I talked my husband into getting back behind the wheel and decided to try to push the car out myself, and imagine, I did manage to lift the back of the Volga so my husband was able to get out. Later, I tried to repeat my feat, but it turned out that it is no longer possible to repeat such a thing. The Mandela effect is a phenomenon that raises many questions and debates. I want to share one such case that happened to me in 2014. Every day, coming back from work, I took the elevator up to my floor together with a little neighbor girl, Dasha, who was 7 years old at the time. She had just started first grade. We often joked and laughed as the elevator went up to my floor, and Dasha continued on her way a few floors higher. One day, I found myself thinking that I hadn't seen Dasha in months. When I got home, I shared my thoughts with my family. I haven't seen little Dasha for a long time. Their answer amazed me. How small is she? She's already 15 years old. She's already dating guys? I was really shocked. After all, just a couple of months ago, Dasha and I met daily in the elevator, and now it turned out that she was already 15 years old and did not live here at all. It was so strange that I even felt a cold sweat running down my back. I decided not to tell my family for fear that they would think I was crazy. One unusual story happened in my childhood that I will remember for the rest of my life. It was in 1900. Classes were in the second shift, and in winter, as you know, it got dark early in central Russia. The school day ended quite late, and when I left the school, it was already dense dusk outside. Since first grade, I was used to walking home alone, although my friend always met my father on such dark evenings. The route went through yard, a park, and alleys, which added a certain mystery to the path. The bright full moon was shining that evening, illuminating my path. As I looked up, I noticed something incredible. There were several unidentified objects hovering around the moon, forming an even circle. There were about 9 to 12 of them, and each seemed huge, occupying about 1/12 of the space around the moon. The objects emitted a bright light, reminiscent of the glow of the moon itself, and remained perfectly still, as if hovering in anticipation. I shared my discovery with my friend and her father, but they didn't seem to pay much attention to what I said. This surprised me a little, for it was rare to see such a sight. Nevertheless, I continued to observe this phenomenon for about 15 more minutes as I walked home. Of course, none of my relatives could be convinced of the truth of what I had seen. A very unusual incident happened to me too. One day I was standing at a bus stop waiting for a bus, but alas, I was late. There were no companions, and I began to think, why doesn't anyone pay attention to me? I'm dressed so beautifully today, a new coat, everything looks spectacular. Suddenly, just as this thought flashed through my mind, an elderly man with a stick came up to me. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "Well, no one can pick up a beauty like that. It's a pity I don't have a car, or I'd give you a ride." Saying that, he walked past me. I turned around to look after him, but he was nowhere to be found. How could this have happened? The man was elderly, barely able to move, leaning on his wand. Could I have missed where he'd gone? My friend and I decided to travel from Philadelphia to New York by train. When we got on the train, we took the empty seats. There was a family of 4 in front of us. Their seats were across from each other. Having spent the whole day in New York, in the evening we returned back and again got on the train, choosing the same seats. To our surprise, the same family was in front of us in the same seats. They too remembered us and were amazed at the coincidence. My friend and I decided to travel from Philadelphia to New York by train. When we got on the train, we took the empty seats. There was a family of 4 in front of us. Their seats were across from each other. Having spent the whole day in New York, in the evening we returned back and again got on the train, choosing the same seats. To our surprise, the same family was in front of us in the same seats. They too remembered us and were amazed at the coincidence. I have experienced one strange incident, which is difficult to refer to any particular section. Let me summarize it briefly. One night, my 9-year-old son and I went to bed. Suddenly, there was a phone call about 2 o'clock that woke us both up. It was my mom calling to break the terrible news. My stepfather had passed away. Realizing that I needed to be by my mom's side immediately to support her in her time of need, I quickly got ready. I didn't want to scare my son, so I didn't tell him anything about what had happened, just explained that I needed to leave. Since my son was a serious and responsible boy, I calmly left him home alone. Before leaving, I noticed that my white underwear was drying on the radiator, and when I took it off, I noticed that my right palm was completely black, as if I had been fingerprinted. However, there was no trace of blackness on the underwear. I ran to my mom, but before I went out, I tried to wash my hand. Nothing helped. Interestingly, the blackness was covered by the very hand I had used to pick up the phone when my mom called. I jokingly suggested that it was my stepfather who had left me some kind of black mark, adding that I was afraid I would be next. For 3 or 4 days, I walked around with that black palm, trying to figure out what I could have gotten so dirty in the middle of the night in my own apartment. But there was no answer. Gradually, the blackness disappeared by itself, either washed away or somehow dissipated. Perhaps it was some strange chemical reaction of my body to the tragic news of my stepfather's death. He was a good man, and I'm still struggling to find a rational explanation for what happened. Although I have a penchant for mysticism, unusual occurrences in my life happen infrequently, but they are varied. This spring, something strange happened to me. I went ice fishing in my favorite secluded spot, taking the dogs with me. Up to this point, the snow had already melted, exposing the ice. But the day before, a fresh layer of snow, about 15 centimeters thick, had fallen. The dogs were running ahead of me, exploring the area. An old dog dug something under the snow and started licking the fine. As I got closer, I saw that she was licking a paw that looked like a dog's or belonged to another animal. I could not see clearly due to the lack of glasses, but at some point the paw began to move, and instead I saw a fluttering bird wing. Soon this wing paw disappeared under the snow. I called out to the dog, drove him away, and continued my search for old holes located only 5 to 7 meters from that spot. I must confess, for the entire fishing trip, I never ventured over to that spot to see what was there. Even the dogs seemed to have forgotten about the event and avoided coming close. A few days later, the snow finally melted, and there was nothing but a clear surface on the ice. Here is one of the unexplained stories that happened in my life. There was a black cat who lived in the yard of our house, and every summer brought kittens from the basement to the lawn near the house, hiding them in the bushes. We made them a little house out of a cardboard box and took care of them by feeding them. One summer was particularly rainy, and it rained continuously for 3 days in a row. I moved the kittens and the cat to a glassed-in balcony, as my dog could not tolerate cats. For about 5 days I nursed them, fed them, and treated the kittens' eyes. Everything was going well. On the 5th day in the evening, around 11:00 p.m., I went to the balcony to see if everything was okay. The cat was sitting on the ledge, and the kittens were sleeping sweetly in the box. The next morning, when I woke up around 8:00 a.m., the cat was not on the balcony. The kittens were still there, but the cat was nowhere to be found. The balcony was closed, and the windows were closed too. 2 days passed, and I noticed the cat on the same lawn where the box with the kittens used to be. How is that possible? In the 1990s, conflicts between local groups in the villages were not uncommon, and even girls were involved in fights to defend their territory. One day, in 1998, I encountered an amazing situation. On a day off, I decided to go to a disco in a neighboring village. We tried to look as good as possible, although jewelry was scarce at that time. I decided to secretly borrow an expensive wristwatch from my mother. When we arrived at the disco, the usual for those times fight between representatives of different villages started. I was always active and participated in such conflict, trying to protect my own. After the fight, I noticed that my watch was missing. We tried to find it, but without success. I drove home in tears, wondering how to explain to my mom the loss of such an expensive watch. At night, I went to bed anxious, expecting punishment in the morning. In the morning, my mother woke me up and asked me to buy a new battery for the watch, as the old one had apparently died. Imagine my surprise when I saw the clock lying quietly on the sideboard, as if it had never been touched. The distance between our villages was as much as 20 kilometers. Who knows how the clock got back in place? Many years passed, but I never found an explanation for this event. This dream was so vivid and realistic that I almost forgot that it was only a dream. It began with the fact that I suddenly found myself in China in the period of 50-60 years of the last century. I was in the middle of raising children and was expecting re-education lessons. Suddenly, there were loud pops in the night, and I realized that they were shooting through the window. Frightened, I hid behind a closet. Then I realized that the real repression had begun. Together with my Chinese comrade, we began to hide from the authorities and the police, moving cautiously through the streets of the city. Everywhere stood people in ochre-colored uniforms, wearing little caps. I realized they were looking for us, and we tried any way we could to leave the city. We jumped on an old bus, trying to get away, but then we kept moving in small runs. To disguise myself, I pretended to be a child, wrapped in a scarf, became an elegant lady, or turned into an inconspicuous man. We did everything we could to avoid capture, but the repressive forces had figured us out, and the order was given to capture us. We kept running through small cafes, restaurants, and other establishments. The dream was so conscious that I felt all the emotions, as in real life: fear, panic, tension. And then this strange dream ended, and I woke up. It turned out that in 1955, a brutal repression had indeed begun in China, killing millions of people. I found pictures of the repression, and they were wearing exactly the same costumes as in the dream: ochre-colored clothes and strange caparas. It felt like I was reliving someone else's life. Then the thought occurred to me: what if in the dream we get into other people's avatars and live a short life, obeying local laws? And for the locals, we are like actors creating a crowd on a theater stage. That's the kind of strange and conscious dream I had. What do you think about it?